everyone. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the Martini. My name is Gus. I'm Area Rentals Director of Business Development for North America. And I've been with the Area family now for over 17 years and honored to be your host today. As a friendly reminder, please send us your questions via the Q&A tab here on Zoom, and we'll get to as many of those as possible during the course of the show today. We are very fortunate to have with us today the truly awesome Florian Ballhaus. Florian was born in Germany and began his career in America at the age of 16. He started as a second camera assistant for his father, Michael Ballhaus, and worked his way up in the industry to second unit cinematographer with directors like Martin Scorsese and Mike Nichols. He began his own career as a cinematographer in 1997, shooting for directors Alan Rudolph and Adam Brooks. He has collaborated with director David Frankel on 5 features, including The Devil Wears Prada, and director Robert Schwenke on 7 films, including the critically acclaimed The Captain, which won Best Cinematography at the San Sebastian Film Festival, as well as the 2018 German Camera Award. Some of Florian's other projects include Flight Plan, Marley and Me, Red, The Book Thief, Insurgent, and premiering today on Disney Plus, the one and only Ivan, which I'm looking forward to seeing. Welcome, Florian, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Hey, Gus.
It's great to be able to catch up. We usually see each other on average once a month in New York or something like that. And
yes,
it's been
not this year. No.
Not this year. No.
Different year.
So you've been hanging out in Europe the last couple of months. And,
yes.
you're currently in Berlin.
I actually managed to get away after doing the full lockdown until the middle of June. We finally got a chance to go to Europe, and we both have German passports, so we got on a plane and flew to Germany, and it was a great relief to get away for a little bit.
Yeah, very nice. Very, very nice. So I have always been in awe of just kind of it feels like you grew up in the film industry, and it's been kind of a family business in a way. And I just love always when we get together hearing like little tidbits and stories of, what you've, the battle scars and the wars you've been through and the, and the fun on set. And so I would could you just kind of give us like an overview of what it was like,
Yeah. I always say that I never really had a chance to do anything else. I was sort of so born into this business, and I grew up in Germany, mostly in Berlin, and spent a lot of my childhood on movie sets with my dad and my mom. My mom was an actress initially, and then was a production designer, and I was it was all showbiz all the time. But on these very small scale movies, it wasn't like a big Hollywood type movie, but it would be like 3-4 movies a year. And my dad would always be somewhere on the set with all these crazy people. It was a pretty colorful bunch back then, the Fassbinder people. It's not a great place for a 9-year-old necessarily, in retrospect. But, so I really was just drawn to all that. As a kid, I thought it was fascinating. And even when I was like 11 years old, decided that I wanted to become a cinematographer. I had absolutely no idea what it meant, but somehow that seemed like a cool thing. It's what my dad did, and I seemed like that. It seemed to me like this is the way to go. And then a few years later, I got a chance to actually sort of really experience it as he got his first chance to shoot a movie in the U.S. in 1982.
Wow. What's the first film set you remember, vividly being on the first film?
I remember a lot of film set as a kid, mostly getting yelled at by Fassbinder for being in the way. I remember they were shooting this movie Chinese Roulette, which is, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's one of the wackier Fassbinder movies. It was really out there. It was all shot in our family had a country home. It was all shot in that house, and all the cast and crew members all stayed there, and they would all shoot during the day, and at night they would play Chinese roulette, and they would get drunk and do a lot of blow. And it was not a very wholesome environment for a little kid to spend their spring break. So, it was. I was not a massive Fassbinder fan when I was a kid. I can say that. And then Marriage with Maria Brown, I remember I spent some time on the set of that. That was a big memorable movie for us. But we would go see these movies when I was like 10, 11 years old, and Fassbinder movies were not made for kids. I did not know what I was looking at. It's very confusing.
Interesting. Oh, so at that time, just curious, was there anything else that, I mean, you did say that that was your life, but I'm just curious, was there anything else like, you're like, if this cinematography thing doesn't work out, maybe I'd like to go and do this.
I never really had a plan B. It never occurred to me this year is the first time when I'm thinking, maybe I should have had a plan B, but I never really had a plan B. It never occurred to me that I couldn't do this. I didn't think necessarily I would maybe make it as a cinematographer, but I thought I would want to work in this industry. That always seemed clear to me from the get-go. And really, for the first time, I really fell in love with movie sets. The first time I got to work on one when we came to the U.S. and did a movie there. My dad's first movie, and I was 16, and he took me along, and for some bizarre reason decided that I should be the loader, even though I had absolutely never done it before and had no clue what to do. And that was like completely set me off. I mean, then I barely wanted to finish high school, and I was just like, I was on fire. I fell in love with the whole craziness of it all. There was no stopping me then. So, I never really developed like I always liked politics. I was like, if I had known, I would have wanted to be a politician if I had no showbiz background. But it never seemed like that's something I would have chased actively. And so, I was very happy just to dive in the minute I finished school, just to get to work.
I was going to say, there's actually plenty of politics in filmmaking.
Yeah, no, I often feel that. As I sort of maneuver things, I feel like, maybe that other career could have worked out. But no, it's a good skill set, certainly, if you feel like you have it, to be able to get along with people.
Very nice. Besides obviously being there with your dad and working for those years with him, were there other filmmakers, other inspirations for you that were really like, wow, love what they're doing. I'd like to do something like that?
Well, it was mostly, it's very hard to be inspired by your dad because he's your dad, right? So it seems normal, like working with him, as much as I realized, obviously, that, he had an unbelievable career and all of it, it never seemed as real to me or as fantastic as all these other cinematographers. I always felt like, obviously, they knew what they were doing, and my dad was just a fraud. That's kind of like, because he's your dad. How good could he really be? Obviously, later on, I realized, I could put that in a little bit of perspective. But they were great. Sven Nykvist, I was a massive fan of him, and Nestor Mendros and people like that. They were sort of in those years. I just felt like did amazing work, and and Chapman and all these people. They were obviously. The filmmakers, and the amazing thing was that, my dad actually got a chance to work with some of these filmmakers that I would just so admire as, before we within years of starting to work in the US, he was working with Scorsese, and that's someone obviously that was on everyone's radar screen. And even as a 16-year-old, you were aware of his movies and were in love with them and loved all that world. So it was amazing to go from sort of admiring these people to working for them in the course of 4 years when you're 19 years old, you just go like, wow, yeah, okay, now we're doing this, so it was an amazing way to kind of grow into this industry. It also kind of spoils you for the rest of your career because you just go like, well, wait, this isn't the way it's going to go always. You don't get to just work with, with Mike Nichols, Martin Scorsese, and James Brooks in 1 year. That's not a normal year. But I got over that.
I was also very curious about, obviously being at a young age, coming over from Germany to the US, and that must have been a really interesting transition. But what was the one like biggest takeaway for you coming over to the US and seeing, what was the biggest difference?
The biggest difference is just seemed like these were the movies that I had grown up admiring. These were the movies. This to me was, again, it's a little bit like not believing your dad could really be a great artist. It's like, this is a different world that I admire from afar. And being able to come to this world and be part of that, it's like sort of stepping into your dream. It's like it becomes something that it just seemed bigger than life. And to be able to be part of that was just an unbelievably appealing thing. So it didn't really, I love Berlin, and I love being in Germany, and I loved coming back, and I had lots of friends here, and I'm still very attached to it, and I always was. But in terms of industry, I was very, very drawn to that industry, especially as a young kid. It just seemed larger than life. Coming to New York as a 16-year-old and living there and working there. And then, you know, when I finished German high school at 19, I moved to New York permanently, and it just seemed like this unbelievable adventure that just wouldn't stop. And luckily it hasn't stopped yet, so.
That's very cool. And so I want to ask, was there ever a temptation to go even further and go out to Los Angeles at that point?
You know what, in the 90s, there was so much work in LA. There was a brief period where we thought about that, and my wife Pam and I, you know, thought about, like, look, would we be able to spend more time together and all that? And she's a true New Yorker, and I, God bless her, you know, luckily she was like, no, this is not going to happen. I'm not moving out there. And I'm really glad I didn't, because I think it, while there was a lot of traveling and it was difficult at times, but it just, it was great I think it was great to raise our kids in New York mostly. And I always loved the sort of New York connection. I love working in New York. I think it's a very special place to work. And I think out of all that mess and chaos, great things get created. And I'm kind of happy I didn't go sort of in that full LA kind of lifestyle thing at the time. Now I love going to LA. Now that, you know, our kids are growing up and all that, I love going out there any chance I get. Sadly, they don't shoot many movies out there anymore, but anytime I get to go out for post or anything like that, I have a blast. But I'm glad we didn't end up doing that. We actually did sort of the opposite. When I moved up from operator to cinematographer, I had a chance to shoot low budget things here in Europe. And so we moved to, this is 22 years ago, we moved to Berlin for 2 years. So took our kids and put them in school here and in daycare, and just kind of said, like, let's make the transition here and sort of reinvent myself and come back as a cinematographer. And because it's such a difficult step to take, that I thought, like, this would help, and I just get a lot of shooting under my belt with, like, smaller things here. Well, basically, based on sort of the misunderstanding that they didn't really understand the difference between operator and DP, I kind of could cash in on that and say, oh, I did the count on that. Allowed me to kind of get movies that I don't, you know, opportunities that I wouldn't have gotten in the US. So I milked that for all it was worth, and then came back a couple of years later, and that worked out reasonably well.
Very good. I was actually going to ask how that transition went from being a camera assistant to that. That's very funny.
That was really the hardest one, you know, and I really liked being on the crew. It was one of the things that, you know, I fell in love with the circus more than I did with the profession. I didn't really understand cinematography fully when I fell in love with working on movies. You know, what I did understand is the set dynamic and the people and how they come together and all that. So, you know, I felt like at times, like, you know, if I didn't make it to the top, I could be very happy doing other things. I think there's a lot of great steps on the way to being a cinematographer, and many of them incredibly rewarding and incredibly creative. So I wasn't rushing. I was not somebody who felt like, you know, I got to be shooting by now. You know, I just got such an early start that I ended up doing things fairly early, but I took a fair amount of time doing things. So ultimately, my dad, who sort of pushed me and said, look, you're too comfortable. You're having too much fun. You know, you should be doing, I want you a little more scared. This is getting too easy for you. So it was good. And that, you know, so the transitions from focus puller to operator were sort of organic ones, because you're still within that. You're still working for the same people and the same cinematographers or whatever. But then becoming, you know, a cinematographer, obviously all of a sudden you're not, you know, the people who've hired you are now no longer there for you. And I, you know, obviously worked with my dad a tremendous amount. I worked with Oliver Stapleton a lot, who I learned a lot from, and who was very influential to me. And, but, you know, taking that step to cinematographer is like, it was hard. It was a difficult thing. And I think it's been difficult for a lot of people. And having the ability to do what I did really helped. And I think, you know, when I came back, initially it was a little clunky, of course, because I was then getting offers to shoot movies in Germany, and we were living in New York again, and I was trying to transition back, but most of my work was here. So it wasn't easy, but, you know, it's never easy, and it kind of worked out. And, you know, Alan Rudolph was kind of instrumental actually in sort of making that happen, because I got a chance to do a movie with him very early on in my career in Berlin. He was shooting something here, and he just hired me because he thought I was nice when he met me. He'd never seen anything I'd done or anything like that. Didn't care. Just, you know, he wants to shot the way he likes it anyway. So that was like the first movie I did, like an American type movie. It was never released here, sadly, but like with real actors and real things. And it was kind of helped me transition back to the US.
Mm. And so, I mean, I have to ask, I mean, here you are working with Scorsese, like you said, Mike Nichols, and you did a couple of movies with Robert Redford as well. And
Yes.
I have to ask, I mean, if you had to pick like the story that always comes back to being on set with Scorsese, what's the one that really stands out and you just can't forget even if you wanted to try?
I think, you know, in a way, working on Goodfellas was really just all the Goodfellas. The experience of that was the most memorable in a way. It's for a number of reasons, and it's not just because it turned out to be such a great movie, but it was such a miserable experience. It was a really, really hard movie to shoot. It was not a very happy set. It was not a very sort of relaxed set, and it was grueling hours. And we were all, you know, we weren't surrounded by nice people. You know, it wasn't, you know, other than Marty, and you know, obviously there's some. Oh, there we go. There's, you know, it looks like I'm part of the period there. On the, my haircut is like right out of the movie. You know, it was a really hard movie to work on, and we were all just, I think after the first week, we were all just felt like we just been beaten to a pulp. And it, so, you know, that movie, and then you see the movie come together. When I saw it the next year, we were all went to see it in the movie theater when we were working on a movie in Virginia somewhere, and just to understand how that movie came together was just so rewarding. It's such an amazing experience because it really didn't read on the page. It didn't quite translate to what an amazing movie that would become. It didn't quite. I remember my dad is one of the things I always remember. My dad read the script and he was really unhappy about it. Obviously he wanted to work with Marty and loved him, but he read it and says, I don't understand. Why would we make this movie and who cares? And he didn't, it wasn't clear what a great movie that was going to become. And he hated the violence and all that. And he was really, but he trusted obviously the filmmaker, and then later realized, you know, and took every opportunity to make this movie as great as it could be. But initially he was just kind of repelled by it. When he first read it, I remember he was like in a depression. He was like, oh God, it's all these horrible people and all this violence. And, you know, but, you know, that whole experience was just, yeah, I learned so much from that. And just, you know, working with all these, you know, people that were just, I mean, working with De Niro was like, you know, it was an unbelievable dream. You know, I was, you know, when I was really young, I was like 23 years old. So, and I was a focus puller, and I would, you know, De Niro told me I couldn't look at him when he was acting, and because you know, like, it was like moments like that, I was like, what am I doing here? I don't, you know, just a kid. I want to go back to school. But it was just an amazing experience.
Wow. And how about Mike Nichols working with him?
Nichols is great. I mean, Nichols was working on Working Girl was probably one of the most fun experiences. Quite the opposite of Goodfellas. It was just, he was incredibly smart. He was just incredibly funny and talented. And you could, you know, you listen to his Nichols and May things, you know, his routines. He's just like, he's such a funny man that you just, and he was so, he loved my dad and got along with him really well. And it was just it's a wonderful kind of, it was a wonderful movie to work on. It was really, and it was a difficult movie because, you know, there were challenges, but everyone was just in an unbelievable mood. And it was a really fun movie. It just was a real blast to work on.
And so I'd like to talk to you about kind of your connection to technology too, because obviously coming up as a camera assistant, you own a lot of your own equipment. Your dad owned a lot of his equipment. And, you know, I think there's probably a personal connection there. And I'd just like you to talk about what it is, because that comes up from our audience a lot. They want to hear about, do you recommend owning equipment? What is it about owning equipment that you really like? You know, is it the cameras? Is it the lenses? You know,
right.
It constantly comes up.
It's an interesting thing, but it's also ever changing, I think, and it's really fundamentally changed since we're in a digital sort of era. I think, you know, owning equipment was part of just being able to be independent in a way. It was a way to augment your income. It was a way to make sure you have all the things that you want around you and do not have to hunt for all the bits and pieces that you really care about. And to know that you have like a complete and whole package, and you go in a movie and you know that everything works and everything is together. And it comes from the days when that wasn't true for every rental house. You know, you would go to a lot of places and things were not as put together as they are now. They didn't have the accessories. They didn't have the things you wanted. The lenses weren't in really good shape, and you would have to fish for weeks to find good gear. You know, those days are over now. I think that's really changed. I think now it's become it's transitioned for me to sort of owning the things that I care about, and owning, like I always said, the Leica, the Sumiluxes, and I love those, and I have like specialty things that I like, that I know I can always have. I know if I do a little low budget movie, I know I have those lenses. When we shot The Captain, I would bring my camera bodies and my Leicas over, and I know that I could have that. I think the ownership of digital cameras is not as sexy as as the ownership of film cameras. I think there was just something much more fun about that. It was a much more rewarding kind of thing. And it mattered because if things had to be well maintained, and if you knew this stuff was going to work well if you owned it and it was well maintained, and you don't really have those challenges with the digital equipment as much as you do with the film cameras. I think the tweaking of it all. And the other thing is that obviously digital cameras just don't, you don't get 10 years out of a digital camera. I mean, Alexa has been amazing. It's, 10 years now since Alexa came out. So it's basically been a version of the same technology has been going on for 10 years. And that's incredible. I mean, that's an incredible testament. What else has lasted 10 years in this digital era? I mean, it's like nothing, that everything's been replaced every other week. But even so, it's 4 generations later, and you need to keep updating, and so I don't know that I would recommend ownership of that kind of stuff to anyone anymore. I don't know that how much you get out of it, because I think the cameras are easy to come by. And if you don't work them enough, if you spend a lot of the time of the year prepping or finding new work or doing posts or whatever, chances are you're not really going to pay them off before they're obsolete. It's not something I'm sort of in the game now, and I think I'll stay in it for a while. But I think it's about the glass. I think you want to own, like, if you love lenses and you think that they're kind of special, own them and know you have them, and know that's what I would do. If I were to start over now, I would make it all about the glass.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from others too. They because the lenses in the camera are essentially, they feel like it's an extension of them. It's part of it, and they want it. They like the security and the freedom of knowing it's theirs. It's not somebody else. They've always got it. They have it.
It's more of a specialty item, obviously, with the lenses, because they are more unique, and each one is slightly different. Each Alexa is going to hopefully be pretty much like the next Alexa. They're not designed to have great variety and sort of in their rendering of imagery. So yeah, I think I would just make it about own interesting lenses. If you find something that's really cool and really eclectic, and own it, have it, and know that you can use it again. That's what I would do. And also, again, the lenses are going to last you years and years and years. If you don't, then you don't have to update them every other year. It's not something, they may go out of style for a little bit, but who cares? They'll come back.
Very nice. You shared some really fun images too from a couple other films that you worked on as a camera assistant and operator. I think we should bring those up and just kind of look at those. I think they were great. One of them.
I sent you the full file of all random work photos that I found last night. Really backfire.
No, it's great. It's wonderful. But there was one in there that I was, for a moment there, I had to look at it and go, what project was that? And then I said, oh, I think that's a Michael Jackson music video. But I wasn't
actually. Wait,
I was going to ask you. I wasn't sure, but I was going to ask you. Now this obvious, but
this is Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah.
Except there's no, it's always fun. Even at a crucifixion, you can have fun. Marty. Listen, that was a really interesting. That was one of the first movies I did as a focus pull. I had done one TV movie before, and then when I was 21 years old, we went off to Morocco in a little van from Munich with the camera gear, and did that movie. And it was just like, I really barely knew what I was doing. It sort of held on for dear life, and it was an amazing experience.
And is this from Legend of Bagger Vance?
Yes. Yes. Back in the days when you would ride a crane.
That looks so safe.
Yes, it's so safe. I'm so happy we don't do that anymore. And I'm so happy actually in Morocco, I fell off a crane once. We had a particularly talented Italian grip crew. But we were only like a couple of meters in the air, so it wasn't too bad. But luckily, I've never had anything bad happen to me, and I'm very happy we moved on to through remote heads and things like that mostly. My bottom, you could see my dad with his suspenders shouting up to me at the bottom right. That's him.
And what was he saying? Go higher, or was it?
Probably
Awesome.
telling me to make a phone call for him because I had better reception up there. Oh, this was Working Girl. This was
That's great.
that with 80s hair for everyone, including Mr. Nichols.
It's good stuff.
Back in the days of BL4. It's amazing. Oh yeah, this was
This
Baker
was the one.
Boys.
This is Baker Boys. Oh, that's a great movie.
Baker Boys, yes.
So I was
Actually,
completely
the
wrong.
photo. I think Jeff Bridges took this photo for his. He did the books for all his movies with his wide lens.
Yes, those are great.
And I think that's his photo. I think and there's me and there's Pam, who was my wife, and there's Dave Dunlap,
That's brilliant.
who operated. That was an amazing movie.
Very cool.
That was a real fun one to work on.
Awesome. Good stuff.
And this was after hours. This was literally, I was still in high school. So this is my last summer break. I was still in high school, and for my summer break, my special treat was to work on a movie in New York that was all nights. So it was 8 weeks of nights, and we never had a day shot. Or we had some day shots at the beginning of the thing, but every call was like 7, or 6 or 7 p.m. I remember coming back to school, everyone else was like tanned and relaxed, and and I was just like completely exhausted, white as a sheet. I had an amazing time.
Yeah, that movie is just insane. I love it.
It is an insane movie. It was such a fun movie for Scorsese to make. Also, after he had after the 2 previous movies, Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, to sort of go to this movie, and and he talked about this a lot. It was like, I think he had got a really bad reputation with King of Comedy. Things were very much out of control, and the movie didn't make any money, and he was really sort of in a difficult place, and he took on this little wacky comedy, and shot it with my dad. They'd never worked together before, and we do all nights, and we just plow through the work, and he just I think he found sort of a way to make movies again through that experience. And it was really amazing to sort of see how their relationship kind of came out of that he was like, they found this incredible groove together, and went on to do great movies together. So it was amazing to see that relationship kind of start there.
Yeah. And one of our guests is asking about the experience on Bram Stoker's Dracula.
That was a very interesting experience. Dracula was one of the really fun ones. It was really out there, and working with Coppola was also like something amazing. I mean, to me, it was like, I was a massive fan of The Godfather, obviously. And again, he seemed like one of the real directors. He seemed like one of the real people who could really do like real Hollywood movies. It was an amazing experience because he always, he was really pushing very hard to go against all the conventional filmmaking styles. And initially he said he didn't want to do it with any sets. He just wanted to have projections on walls, and he wanted to do all these things in camera. He wanted to do all the effects in camera. So it was one of the first 535 movies. We would literally mark frames and rewind film and do double exposures in camera and things like that. So I had, like, as an assistant, I think I had a 2 months prep, because we were trying to figure out all these things, and we do like fade ups and fade downs in camera, and we would do transitions and double exposures and all this kind of in reverse film, and we'd shoot a lot of the movie in reverse. Initially, the vampires, we'd shoot it all in reverse when they became vampires, and they would act backwards, and then we'd look at it. And so things like that it was really an interesting way to just try to go back. And at some point I remember, spent like hours doing this double exposure in camera, and Coppola sort of came over and said, it's kind of an expensive way to save $2,000 on an optical, to just spend 5 hours doing this. But the movie really, I think, lived from the gimmicks of that. It was like, that was the fun of it. And I think that, it was a treat. It was so out there, the movie. I remember when we were doing it, we just felt like, this is crazy. But it was good.
I have vivid memories of seeing that in the theater and just being blown away. It was just, I would have been a young teenager when that came out, and I was just like, wow.
It was
It
an
felt
interesting
handmade.
experience.
It was so cool.
Yeah, for my dad and Coppola, they really respected each other, but in a way they were a mismatch in an interesting way, because my dad was always trying to sort of take the chaos out of things. He was trying to solve problems and to find solutions and to sort of simplify things, or just to make them sort of manageable. And I think that's something that like Marty greatly appreciated, who just like, he would always, my dad would always, for Marty, he would sort of find a way that he could guide him to the day. And like, hey, look, this is all gonna work out, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Be very positive and really help him sort of, see his way through the day. And I think Coppola was the opposite. He wanted the most amount of chaos possible. He was happiest when everyone else was absolutely desperate. And that was his creativity really came to life when everyone else was ready to kill themselves. Coppola just came into his own, and then he was on fire, and then he was in heaven. And so they were, I think, with their temperaments was a bit of a mismatch. We had great respect for each other, and the movie was great, and it looked really cool, but it wasn't. I don't think it's quite what each other were after.
Yeah, wild. So going into now your work as a DP, and what I really admire for is, you haven't really been stereotyped as far as I can see. You've been very diverse in a lot of the work that you've done. Yes, you have a lot of romantic comedies on there that, me and my colleagues.
I wish that were true, Gus.
Well,
I wish that were more true.
No, but I mean, you've done, Flight Plan is a great throwback to a Hitchcock film, right? I mean,
right.
Red is an action comedy, and you have lots of work that is like diverse, and I think it's fun and it's very cool.
I think it's getting harder to do that, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, what is it like for you to make sure that you don't, get pushed into a corner, and you're able to, do other things?
Yeah, it's always, I'm very interested in not having to shoot the same movie over and over again. And I remember, after Prada, I would get scripts, and the first page would say, we begin on a woman's shoes, and I would close the script and say, I'm sorry, I cannot do this. I've done the shoe movie, I have to go and do something else. But obviously you do certain things, and you're comfortable with certain things, and mostly it's about your relationships with directors. So, I want to work with directors that I like. I feel like you want to invest in a relationship with a director beyond just the one movie. I think in a perfect world, you'd hope you find someone that you'll do many movies with, and you will push each other to do your best work, I think, as you go on to work together repeatedly. So I try to work with, I have a few directors that I work with and I've worked with repeatedly, and I want to continue working with them. And if they have different tastes and want to try to do different things, that really helps. But I've tried to, not do the same movie over and over again. But I've also found it is increasingly difficult to not get pigeonholed. I think it's, especially with like these big action movies, the conversation of like, well, has he done action? Has he done enough this? You always come into that, and you have to explain yourself and do all the things. And I think it's one of the disappointing things in the industry right now, is that there's this emphasis, and it almost feels like commercials, like you need to be doing the exact same thing that they've already done. You need to show them that you've already shot this movie that they want you to shoot. And I always feel like it's such a misunderstanding. If I'd already shot that, I wouldn't want to do it again. I don't want to shoot a movie that looks exactly like Prada. I don't want to shoot a movie that looks exactly like The Captain even. You want to go on and do other things. You do versions of things, obviously. Comedies are fun, and I like working on them. Obviously, as a cinematographer, you're always drawn to the big, dark dramas, and you don't feel like you can, it's not all about the camera work on comedies. But it's so rewarding to do them also, and they are so much fun for the audience. And I often think of Sullivan's Travel, the movie, where he goes out and he wants to desperately make, the Oh Brother Where Art Thou, and the big dramatic, thing, and then he realizes how much fun people have with the comedies, and how rewarding that could be. And when you go to like a test screening with a really fun comedy and see it play and see the people have an amazing time, it's a really rewarding and fun thing. So I like comedies, and I like that, and I like having fun at work also, and still making them pretty, making them beautiful. And but yeah, it's. I want to do different things. I have to say, I'm not particularly drawn to the extreme, I probably wouldn't be the right guy to shoot a Fast and Furious. That wouldn't be my thing. It's not, I think they're amazing, and I'm in awe of what they do, but don't know that that would be my best kind of thing. You know, like I think action movies are fine as long as they're about something. But yeah, I think it becomes increasingly difficult to have a variety of things that you do as they also make fewer movies. You know, like the drama sort of thing is just being kind of phased out as a cinema release, certainly. So, you know, that's kind of gone away. And then what's left? What's left that's sort of about people? That's not about necessarily, you know, superheroes. And what else is there? So all of a sudden the comedies are looking great, you know. So.
Well, there's a specific question from the audience, and I think this actually goes back to what I was going to ask you about prep. And, you know, what do you do when you work with these directors? Obviously, you've got a relationship with them, but each project is different, unique. And do you create lookbooks? Do you build references based on other films, photographers, or painters? Or what's your process going into find the look?
You know, it's different for every movie, first of all. I think one of the things the lookbook thing, I find a little exhausting. I feel like it's a little bit misleading at times. It can be helpful. One of the things that I enjoy doing the most is sort of doing the opposite of reference movies, looking at the movies that you don't want it to look like. Because and I think a lot of times I think that's a really helpful exercise when you shoot a certain movie and you say, well, these are similar movies, and what do they have that we don't want? Like we want to stay away from this one, to stay away from that, and sort of find your own style through the process of elimination, and saying like, no, I don't. I hate the way that looks. You know, we're just finding things and it's kind of honing into what your style is. It's the whole style conversation I find often very difficult. I always feel like a movie, you have to let the movie sort of find its style. I think you don't want to go into it unless you're doing like a genre piece and it's, you know, like it's a film noir type thing and it's very clear that it's going to have to be that. But I feel like you need to let the movie have a certain amount of breathing room to find its own style. And obviously it doesn't mean you just revert to sort of the standard things that you do in every other movie, but it means that you just kind of, that you kind of tune into what it's becoming as it's evolving in front of you, rather than just saying, okay, it's gonna have to be shot like this and everything has to be like that. I think what I'm drawn to always is sort of having a visual journey and in every movie feeling like you're going from A to B somehow. That the first frame isn't like the last frame. Or the one in the middle, that you're starting out in one way and you're going to something else. Or you have two different parts of the movie that are contrasting each other. So those are things I'm drawn to in general. But in terms of style, I try to sort of I try to have a light touch and sort of let it find itself. And like that was an interesting conversation, including with the captain. You know, we didn't go into the captain with sort of a very strict like lookbook and say it has to be all this. We were very drawn to photography at the time, and we wanted to be black and white for sure. We knew we wanted the starkness of that. We had very precise conversations about camera movement because we really felt like and this is a longer conversation, I mean, one of the things about the movie is that we never wanted to feel like we're really getting inside his head when he was becoming this monster. That we needed to keep a certain kind of distance to not try to explain at every moment what was occurring inside his mind. So there was a lot of restraint. And again, it's like a little bit of the process of elimination. Like, you know, not every time something dramatic happens, we're going to do a big move in on him as if we now were to understand what goes on in this monster's mind. So we hung back, you know, like, so it's things like that. It's like you come up with sort of a list of tools and a rule book for yourself, as it were, of things that you think are right for the movie. Then you let it play itself out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that perfect transition into the captain, because that was the next. Wow, it's like we rehearsed this. So here's a film that, you know, I think I saw it first at Camera Homage when we were out there, and I was just blown away and just incredible. And I think I'd love to hear, because it was not a big budget film, but it's epic. It truly is, on the way you guys approached it. And you mixed formats, and you were also in black and white, and location in the most miserable time of year.
Yes.
Wow.
It was as miserable as it could possibly be. No, I mean, the movie is very interesting. Robert had this project for many years, and it's something that he'd written He'd shown me, I think, like 5 years prior to shooting early drafts of the script. It's been a passion project of his. It's the darkest possible movie that you could imagine. There's nothing, there's nothing as grim as the captain in many ways. It's and he really wanted to explore the darkness and explore sort of fascism and what happens to people and not explain it, not try to build any bridges and give you easy outs and just kind of leave you with that very unsettling feeling of like not knowing how you would go about things, in these situations. And so it was something, we talked about doing it for a long, long time, and we had done these Divergent movies. We've done a couple of them, and I think it was time to move on from that. And Robert finally felt like this was the right time to try to, this is a grim little surrounding the camera.
I was going to ask you if those are the camera assistants.
Yes, they starved to death waiting for Crafty. That was, it was not a happy set necessarily, but Robert was incredibly focused. He was like, this was really like a dream project for him. It was something that he'd been after for a long time. And it was very difficult to do. There's Florian Emmerich, the operator, who was just wonderful, but did all this beautiful work. And that movie would have never looked as good without his input. I mean, he was an amazing contributor to the whole thing. So Robert was incredibly focused, and as things got increasingly difficult, he would lose some funding, and as they always do when you start out. I think we had $5 million to make this movie. So we started out with nothing, and it became less, with every day. Somehow there was little things slipped away and got difficult, but he was incredibly focused, and everyone was incredibly focused, and everyone who was there was really wanted to make this movie. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences in that sense. It just kind of brought you back to sort of the reason we all wanted to make movies in the first place. And everyone was on the same page as we were making that movie. Everyone was incredibly involved in what was happening and what we were doing and what we were telling in the story and what were we saying and why were we saying it. And it was really touching. It was really touching to go through that. And Max, the lead, was a wonderful young actor he's like 21 years old and was a very sweet, very talented actor and a lovely guy. But as the movie progressed, we pretty much sort of shot it in sequence. He became this horrible monster, and people felt like bad by being friendly with him, because oh my God, you become a monster. It was a really interesting challenge, but it was one of the most rewarding things, just kind of creatively, of just being able to do this without any studio sort of second guessing, there was no, it was never the middle of the road. Robert made some really extreme choices, some of which were I felt like, oh my God, I think we're going too far. And but it was just, what made the movie interesting is that he was absolutely fearless. And I think that it's a fearlessness of that makes it stand out from other things that were watered down or careful. It was very uncareful, and visually, it was just one of the things, again, we were determined to shoot it black and white. We wanted to shoot it digitally because we wanted to look like a modern black and white version. We also didn't want to give in to the idea of it's going to look like it's from the era. We liked photography of the time that was sort of, the tonality of the black and white of the time was very, was important to us, but we didn't want it add gray. I even looked at Robert's look, we can add some gray on it. And he's like, no, absolutely not. We don't want that. We wanted to look like a modern, stark black and white movie. We then tested, the different elections. We tested the black and white, and we let us do it in the parking lot in New Jersey. I remember it's a little hard to make it look like a camp in Poland, but
sometimes during the year I feel like it is
on a bad day. So we tested the black and white Alexa, which looked beautiful. We tested the XT and the 65, and I decided against the black and white because while I thought it looked beautiful, I felt it was going to be too restrictive. My colorist, made the very good point. It's really going to just tie your hands later when you do the DI, not having the colors available to isolate things, or it's going to make it much more difficult. And so you have a much easier time doing all that work when you still have color available and that was a really good point. And then we looked at the 65, and that just looked absolutely stunning. And the extra sharpness of that was amazing because the XT, you know, didn't, in black and white, doesn't look all that sharp. But it turned out we just couldn't quite go there with the 65. We couldn't, you know, that was, you know, you guys were incredibly generous and offered us a deal that was really very, very kind, but we couldn't quite handle even just the data wrangling of it all, and being in the middle of Poland and, you know, in the middle of nowhere with just one van to work out of. So it wasn't gonna go that way. So we shot with the XT, and we shot with it Leicas, and we decided I really wanted to just get as much sort of optical sort of texture in there as I can, analog texture, and we shot almost all of it wide open. And that's when those lenses really come to life. And to me, like, that's also when they look very much like lenses of the era in a way. You know, you have that when the focus kind of slightly, you know, falls apart and the edges, and you combine that sort of with the modern kind of very contrasty black and white. You know, we were really happy with that look, and we got to shoot the opening sequence. With the last 3 days of the movie, we shot the opening sequence of him being chased along the mountainside there, and we got to shoot that with the 65. That was my little reward for having made it through, and that was beautiful. We were very, very happy to have that, and everyone was so excited. That 65 was fairly new at the time, and all the German assistants were super excited to work with it, and it was really fun.
Very cool. And then juxtaposed with your movie, which is debuting today, which is the one and only Ivan, which is, I mean, pretty much the opposite end of the spectrum.
The anti-captain. It couldn't be more different. As a matter of fact, I was slightly afraid that they would be able to see the captain before I got the job, and they would not hire me because I shot that. But luckily, no one went to see the captain in the theater, so I was safe. But yeah, it was a very, very different movie. Again, this was like just along the lines of trying to not make the same movie over and over again. This was just trying to do. It was a very visual effects heavy movie. You know, Disney talking. This is my gaffer using his head as a little. Yes, to show that light comes from like the silver ball. This is just a very different kind of, you know, again, complete opposite of the captain, doing sort of a big Disney family movie that was based on a very sweet book, and making a movie about, you know, talking animals and their relationship and captivity and all that. And it was a really interesting challenge to try to figure out how to do all this. And obviously a lot of figuring out had been done before I came on board. But we knew we were going to have to shoot, you know, there's a large part of the movie is humans and animals are interacting, and it's shot like any kind of, there's a good day on the set of Five. And a good part of the movie was shot, what we call the hybrid shoot, which was actors and animal performers to become the digital animals. And then a part of it was just going to be animals on our main set talking to each other, about a third of the movie. And the decision had been made, and I think this was wise, to not just shoot plates for these things, but to shoot it all virtually, basically to build the set virtually, and to then, you know, do what we did is we rehearsed with these animal performers. We then motion captured their action. We would then go, they recorded the voices, we would go back and they'd make a slight change, and we'd go back and adjust the movements again and all that, and the layout of the blocking of it all. And then in the motion capture, we'd go inside the virtual space and look at our camera positions to make sure that it would work for that. And then we ended up shooting the last, 3 weeks of the movie strictly virtually. So we were just in a virtual space with our cameras. And there's a shot of a very bored camera assistant and operator sitting in a room. It's not even green screen. You're just sitting there. Only you on your little monitor see what the animation is. This is the day of fun in the cage. So, it was a very surreal way of working, and it was the challenge of sort of figuring this out. And one of the things that they wanted to do, and I was really happy about it, is to try to bring as much of our sort of analog world into this virtual shoot. That not every camera move would be like a perfect just computer move, but that we would actually use a dolly, and they would motion capture, or they'd have sensors in the track to get our, to capture all the things we're doing, all the little mistakes or imperfections, all the little bumps and all the little things. And we worked really hard to to find a way to let that all work its way back into the virtual shoot so it wouldn't just stand out as looking like completely animated from the rest of the movie. So we figured out a way, and this is a lot of prep, right? Like there we are. I think it's day 18 of virtual photography. As Jason, you're the operator, Peter Byrne, the focus puller, did an amazing job. But yeah, that was a little tedious by the end. We had 3 weeks of virtual shooting because you don't know where you are in space. It's really interesting because you can't feel things around you. You just see what you see on the screen, and there's no sense of what's happening around it. So it's very tricky for the focus puller, especially also to try to full focus. Obviously, you couldn't see it, so we had to put little distance markers on them in the animation, so we'd know where they are, and then make the choices like that, and make sure that one eye is put it in the left eye, right eye, and things like that. There's a lot of sort of R&D went into the prep phase of that. But what made it interesting to me is to sort of not just hand that all over to the visual effects department to let them just, okay, here you go, you do your thing. We'll see you at the premiere. It was going to be, we were really trying to make it so it was a one, it looked like it was all sort of shot the same way. We found a way to be able to do handheld in the virtual shoot and Steadicam, and we made a techno crane, and so all those tools were available to us. And so that process of finding that was really rewarding and really fun. And I wanted to experience something like that on a movie that was also like still a movie about humans, and about people and about relationships, and not just a big effects movie. And it was kind of I looking forward to doing that. And it was it worked out well. It was an amazing shoot. We had an amazing we shot at the Bond stage, 007 stage in Pinewood, and built this big shopping mall there, and built this whole set. Because the idea is this gorilla was kept in captivity inside a shopping mall. It's based on a real gorilla that actually existed, this item. And he was in a cage in a circus inside of a shopping mall. And so we wanted to build it and sort of keep the absurdity of the captivity in this environment as much alive as possible. So the production designer and I came up with the ideas where we'd peel back the lower walls of the circus at night, so you could see the mall behind the cages. You're looking out, you're looking into the mall, and you're seeing all the lights and all the things going on. So you're not just constantly, because when you want to show captivity, you really show it by seeing what's beyond. If you don't have a beyond, it just becomes a wall, and you don't. Understanding that absurdity was really important to us, and I think that worked out well. It was too bad that this movie was to be released in a year after everyone had been locked up at home for 3 months, and having a movie about captivity might not be the perfect thing, So I'm happy that's coming out on Disney Plus because I think otherwise it just wouldn't really, it had to come out at some point. We shot it like 2.5 years ago, and it just just waiting for the next rush of big Christmas movies, if there is even such a thing, knock on wood, I'm happy that it's seeing the light of day, and I'm sure the audience that it's meant for is going to be very happy to see it at home. It breaks my heart a little bit, obviously, to not have it on the big screen, but it's nice to know that people will see it.
Yeah. I mean, being that it's, like you said, it's a hybrid shoot. And so how do you maintain consistency in the look, through those 3 phases of that? That's got to be quite a challenge.
That was quite a challenge. It was, it was interesting because we had, some of the scenes we had shot, some of the virtual scenes we had came right out of hybrid scenes that we've done with actors. So there was lighting reference. It was just continuing this. We would do the usual sort of silver ball and gray ball thing and all that. So they knew where the lights were coming from. They can just continue on and do the same thing. And they did an amazing job with that. It was really good. Like when it was just like, there were shots in the movie that were virtual that I didn't realize were virtual when I saw the first cut. I was like, oh yeah, we did, no, but that's not, it wasn't you guys, that was us. Like they did an amazing job with that. It was stunning. The technology and the work of the visual effects department was just, that and the animation, the animators, that experience was just unbelievable. Sort of how much they knew about the movement of animals and what they would do and what that would be like, and how big is the turning circle of an elephant, and everyone brought so much to it. It was really, really fun to just see all these incredibly skilled people. The challenge was more the scenes where we didn't have a lighting reference, that were standalone scenes, that were within the confines of our set, obviously, but not things that I had lit, that they would just kind of continue on like that. And that is a real challenge. And it was one of the things I learned on this, and we talked about this briefly. One of the things I'd learned is like, it's really important to try to maintain the consistency of that as much as possible and maintain your voice in the process. And I think one of the takeaways for me is like to try to, if I were to do this again, you really want to try to set up a system and a protocol of sorts where you make sure you maintain some of the same structure that you have on a normal shoot, to be able to have your input at the right time. Because, and I told you this example, is like, if you light something and you show it to the director before I have sort of put my stamp on it, I'm now addressing notes before I had a creative input. So I'm constantly sort of on my back foot. I think you'd want to really, in a perfect world, you'd want to be able to be in there and sort of do a first pass of lighting as you would on a, in a normal shoot, and like, let's do it this way, and show it to the director, let her decide and say, oh yeah, I like this, don't like that. And then you adjust and then you make it what she wants or he wants, and you make that work. But it's very difficult when you're not there and the machine just keeps going and you have to try to sort of to fight your way back in. And I think that, everything worked out really well. It was frustrating for me at times to just sort of feel like you had to fight to have a voice in the process. And I never feel like my voice needs to be the loudest voice, but I'd love to be part of the conversation. I think it's just because, if nothing else, it's even the imperfections that I bring to it, even the things of my way of working that are maybe not the best, are still, you want it to be consistent. You still want that, whatever, even my flawed thinking, you want it to be there as well. So it looks like it's in one piece, rather than just saying all of a sudden somebody who's much more talented is going to go and do it, and you go like, wait, why didn't the rest of the movie look like that? That's, that would be a disaster. So, that was an interesting process, just to kind of see, like, how would you do it the next time? I mean, how would you go about it? And how would you find, obviously, it's a thing, nobody is going to keep you on a movie for there's a year and a half post. So obviously nobody's going to keep me on for the entire time, nor would I want to do that. But it's just, you'd want to establish sort of a way of like just having a little bit of input, even a light touch all throughout, and sort of learning that and learning what's important to you and what you don't get when you take away some of the elements of that we usually have of working, and how much you miss it was incredible. Mm.
And you chose to go large format for this, but there was some testing involved, and originally you were...
Yes. Yeah, it was an interesting thing. I had really wanted, again, to have some sort of analog texture that carries through the movie. That is a movie that is so much visual effects driven. I wanted to feel something that is real and that is sort of analog, and it feels like something we've contributed rather than being a computer generated thing. And I didn't want it to look like one of those super clean Disney real life fairy tale things where they're so perfect that they almost look like they might as well be animated. There's like that sort of, they have heightened it to such a level where I just felt like it's repelling again to me. At least it becomes like the perfection just kind of slightly repels me. So I wanted to still feel a little bit messy, a little bit real. And so I really wanted to try to shoot it with anamorphics, because I just felt like that was going to give me the opportunity just to have like a strong look. And I think Disney Post, and probably wisely, was worried about that, just because not having any vertical wiggle room was just a little scary to them, because you were always guessing about the exact height of the elephant or the whatever small creature you're following around, or the gorilla, and to be able to adjust and to keep them in without having to shrink or change the animation around was probably a good thing. So then I didn't want to just shoot it sort of spherically with the XTs, and so we looked at 65, and then I felt like that was kind of a beautiful way with the DNA lenses. All of a sudden you could find character, and it wasn't overwhelming, and it wasn't maybe as loud as some funky anamorphics, but it felt very real and it felt very animal. And the other thing that I was mindful of is that, it's a movie, there's a lot of different scale. Like, you're dealing with close-ups of elephants and you're having close-ups of chickens. And so there's depth of field is a real consideration. And you wouldn't do it, normally you can find a lot of beautiful texture by just having a lot of out of focus and, very shallow focus. It gives it a beautiful heightened kind of look. I knew I wasn't always going to be able to do that on this movie, just with virtue of being able to keep the smaller creatures, present in it. So I shot it at a much sort of higher stop than I would usually shoot things at. Like I would shoot, at a 4, sometimes a 5.6 or whatever. That's not, I don't usually shoot digitally like that. I would shoot anything that's usually around a 2 or something if I have any say in it. But this really, with the DNAs, I felt like we could get all this texture and all that even at a healthy stop. They still had a nice character to them. So I was really happy. I think that was a really fun experience. And the 65 is just so beautiful. There's just, the frames so, it seems so three-dimensional in a way. And it has so much depth.
Oh, very cool. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing it. And, you and I debated and you didn't feel you had anything to talk about for an hour, but here we are. It's flown by. Really appreciate it, Florian. That was great.
Thanks for letting me do this.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And
all right.
Hopefully we're going to be able to get together soon. And
I hope so too. And hopefully there'll be a reason to get together soon too.
That would be wonderful.
I'll get back to work, I hope.
Looking forward to getting back to work. Yep. Thank you, Florian. We'll talk soon.
All right. Well, take care. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody that joined us today. Please join us again next week. We're going to sit down with Robert Yeoman, ASC, and talk about his work and also his upcoming Wes Anderson film, The French Dispatch. And for those of you that haven't watched before, our episodes are also available on our website at airyrental.com, where you can check out all of our unique and exciting products. And you can follow us on youtube.com/airyrentalgroup. All right, everybody, until next time, cheers.